Well, at the risk of presenting a position paper on the subject, one of the occupational hazards of spending a lot of time on this thing is the inability to sound tangential or profoundly unsure of yourself as a kind of user-friendly presenter. So my apologies for not stumbling or making the mandatory, well, nobody really knows gestures, It's just shite, isn't it?
Isn't it? Yeah.
Okay, then. So forgive me my time in on the subject at hand. It'll show. It doesn't qualify me, but anyway, there it is. So, okay, I'll just arbitrarily start somewhere in the middle, as you do when you jump into a river. So, you could imagine, and I'd be with you if you did, and we'd probably be psychic kin if we were to come to this together, that there's a thing called the first half of your life. Sounds like a painfully obvious thing to say until you say it. And then you begin to ask yourself at a certain point in time, I wonder which half I'm in. And you might think that your birth certificate answers the question for you. Or you could go to your alternative health food store, which is how I found out. So here's a little biographical, in my case, autobiographical declaration, which you could have this look forward to in case you're uncertain about where you are in your life. So I knew I was going on this long trip, the one I'm on now, and so I went to my alternative health food store to get some vitamins. Now, two things. First of all, why I thought you didn't have any vitamins in the British Isles, I don't know. But apparently that's exactly what I thought. So I thought I had to stock up. It's not like I was going to be in the wilds or I don't know what, nettles or what. So anyway, there's that, so my apologies. And then the other part is I went to an alternative health food store. Now, this is a good thought to think. It's one thing to have a health food store, which in the old days was alternative. But what's an alternative health food store? Okay, clearly I'm the only one who's troubled by this. So I'll be troubled aloud for a moment and suggest this to you. It's the mainstream thing, you see? So by this time, health food stores are mainstream because Whole Foods owns the damn things. Do you have Whole Foods here? Okay, so you know what I mean. And of course, organic, are you joking? Monsanto owns the word organic, and so forth and so on. So now what's an alternative health food store? And the answer is probably a health food store that was run by IBM. Right? In other words, it's more normal than what you started with. So anyway, let's see if that allegation holds. So I walked in to the alternative health food store. I was a little bit on guard, slightly on edge, as you should be in alternative anything. And I went to the vitamin section, and it was from the ceiling to the floor, as far as you could see. I thought to myself, this is insane. I can't possibly look at all these vitamins. This is making me ill. So I went to the counter, and I said, look, I've been in that vitamin section. I need some vitamins. I'm going away on a long trip. They don't have any in England. So so can you just help me, because it's way too much to wade through. And so she goes in. Absolutely, she says, come with me. And she sort of jauntily makes her way there, because she was young enough to be jaunty. And we got to the section, and she immediately took one off the shelf, and she began to proclaim from the label, and then she stopped, and her face dropped, and the shame and embarrassment was total and complete. And she literally hid what was in her hand behind her back, and slunk like this. Now, as you know, I'm a recovering mental health professional. What that means is I still have a nose for the non-verbal communicative repertoire that humans are endowed with, right? So I did notice the behavior. And so, as is my wont, I said, you okay? And she said, well, I said, what's the matter? She said, I don't want to say it. I said, okay. What? What don't you want to say? I can keep your secret.
We know what's coming.
Yeah. What don't you want to say? And she said it again. I don't want to say, I don't want to rub it in, she said. Well, this is a mystery play unfolding in a health food store. I'm in some kind of Dantean encounter for vitamins. So then she held up the vitamin package for me to see. And in bold letters, So bold, in fact, you'd never need these to read the label. See what I'm going with this? It said this, 60 plus, like that. That's what the label said. So I looked at her, I said, what didn't you want to say? She said, well, I didn't want to call you a senior citizen. What's my point? This is an alternative health food store. If you can't get called a senior citizen looking like this in an alternative health food store, my friend, you will be lost everywhere else, right? You go into a standard pharmacy, you'll be absolutely adrift. You'll have no idea how old you are, because apparently everybody's decided that out of compassion alone, they're going to keep the information from you. And if that's not bad enough, if you're looking particularly pert one day, someone will say to you, do you know, you don't look your age at all. As if you're to be complimented from your inability to resemble what life has made of you. And to understand that as long as the time parade has left you out, you're lucky. Leaving you to look someone else's age, I guess, which is confusing for all. So what's the point? The point, among others, is this. There is such a thing called the first half of your life. But it's not really a numerical fact, because the meaning of your life, best as I've been able to figure out, is actually in the hands of the people around you. Now, this is only an allegation while you're still alive and you can have some influence on the proceedings, thinking that you exercise authority because you're writing your own life story down. Well, my friend, wait till the second you die and watch what happens to your authority now, because this is when the meaning of your life begins to be crafted for real. That's known as a wake. And the hilarity of their times is the boomers are now insisting at being at their own wakes. So just think about it for a second. First of all, the word wake is a signal that something's happened, don't you see? And the something is you. That means your demise is now complete. Not a matter of opinion, not a lifestyle choice. You're dead. You're as dead as you're ever going to be. That's what makes it a wake. If you're there and you're drinking champagne, it's not a wake, okay? Just deal with it. Christ, the sense of entitlement is just unbelievable. So you steal from everybody the possibility of having a real wake for you because you're there. And you want to chirp in about what your life has meant. See, that's what it really is. Like you just don't want a party that happens when you're not there. Okay. So underneath the joke that I was making about that is something grievous and reprehensible, frankly. And that's the unwillingness to entrust the meaning of your life to others. Now, I'm not saying it's not reasonable to mistrust others the way things seem to be now. But I'm saying, where do you propose the revolution to begin? Do you want to be in the redemption business? Or do you want to be right? Because those are basically your choices. Do you want history to be on your side right now? Or do you want to risk it all on the off chance, the distinct possibility that you would be fundamentally misunderstood for the entirety of your redemptive measures taken? So, the first half of your life seems to me to be characterized by a sequence of tasks. This is what makes the first half of your life recognizable as that. And just arbitrarily, because I got the microphone, I'll give you a suggestion or two about the way they've occurred to me over the years. So if you're in the first half of your life, your principal obligation, it seems to me, is to come to a distinct understanding, a compelling and compelled understanding that seizes you by the gullet and does not let you go, to the following effect. You were born for a reason. Now, if you occupy that allegation, and you do so for longer than 15 minutes at any one time, you'll run the distinct risk of someone asking you, who the fuck do you think you are? That is the direct consequence of entertaining the possibility that you were born for something. See? It seems to be a recipe for grandiosity. Where? In a culture that does not believe in purposefulness at birth. It is grandiosity. So it's a, quote, honest mistake in a place that doesn't know how to live these things out. But that's poverty speaking, you see. Whereas in a relatively intact cultural environment, young people would be obliged to pursue the possibility, would be obliged to pursue the obligation of coming to know why they were born. And the lion's share of the labor in this regard is theirs. This is not bestowed upon them benignly and passively. Their principal obligation is to outgrow nihilism, is what I'm saying. Nihilism, like boredom, being the affectation of the privileged. Yeah. So, you can't use the word random any longer to describe anything. That's officially banished from your vocabulary. Just to take a goofy example. And then you might characterize the notion in the following way. There's a whole in this world. It's the approximate shape, size, color, disposition, predisposition that you would call you. Through that whole is fleeing most of the reasons that life continues to bear us here in the world. The reasons for us being here are fleeing through the hole that is in your shape. You as a young person must find that place and assume that position to stop up even that much the flight path of life from us. Does it sound like it's an important piece of work now? Does it sound like it's self-actualization anymore? It's not. It's not for you that you find out why you were born. That's poverty talking too. It's not more self-development. Initiation fundamentally is the end of the self. Just saying. So, there's three of them that seem to gather around that time of life. The second one is, pursue the possibility you were born for something. Actively seek it out. Address yourself to it and apprentice yourself to your own reasons for being here. That's counterintuitive formulation, isn't it? Apprentice yourself to your reasons for being here. Well, the apprenticeship model has a master in there somewhere. So who's the master? Reason. Not Cartesian reason. I mean, purposefulness is the master in that particular apprenticeship. And this is, of course, inadvertently the antidote to most kids feeling that there's no inherent consequence, there's no inherent purpose to their presence, only consequence. Thirdly, do everything you can to get paid for doing what you were born to do. I know that sounds a little banal compared to the psychic, stratospheric accomplishment of the first two. But getting paid to do what you were born to do plants you here and gets the notion that this is a psychic reality out of you and even engages the lunacies of your psychic reality for the sake of the present moment. Plants you now. Locates you somewhere, right? Not inside your own ruminations. Eventually, you attain some kind of membership in the second half of your life. How do you know when it is? I mean, vitamins aside, how do you know when it is? And generally speaking, it's by virtue of the change in other people's response to you that the news of where you are in your life begins to subtly shift. To take an obvious and painful example, you used to get looked at on occasion by young women, and you don't anymore. You want to walk by and say, hey, you used to look. She would say, honey, the you you're talking about, I was 7 years old the last time you got looked at that way by anybody my age. Yeah, shit changes. And when it does, you're on the receiving end of the news, typically. You're not walking around going, Right then, just in case anybody wants to know, older than I was. In case you're wondering. Just thought it'd, save you the indecision. Clearly aging. And the fascinating thing about the option of an age-phobic culture to use the word aging to describe some of its members is the ing on the end. If you attend to the words, you pick up a lot of stuff. Ain't nobody going to call you aged unless they don't care what you think of them. But aging, ooh, that's kind of user-friendly. Why? Because the ing suggests it's kind of a process. And if it's a process, well, it's not over yet. And you might be on the early stage of it, so that's good. See? And then go to the, the New Age section of your local bookstore, which tends to be the whole bookstore, basically now. Except for the investment section, there's those two. And then look at how many book titles have ing at the end of the verb in their titles. It's jaw-dropping how many there are. Why? Because they're all trafficking in the same illusion that if you just work hard enough, everything's going to work out just fine. Just do this. 5 principles, 7 stages, 12 sages, whatever the hell it is. It's a strategy and it's a program and you'll be fine. But you got to buy the book. Don't read the back cover. You got to buy the whole book. Do the work, etc., etc. Okay. Second half of your life is characterized by a kind of spirit project, not spiritual. A project that the spirit must undertake, not everything spiritual. And I would characterize it simply as this. Whatever your success was in pursuing that first half of your life and its many purposes and reasons and claims that it makes upon you, regardless of whether you even awoke to the fact that there is such a thing, whether or not you were claimed by it or lucky enough to claim it too, the second half of your life has a different thing. It's not a continuation of the first. It's not an iteration of the first. It must kick in regardless of the first. That's the hard part, because it's not a continuum. Because an old person is not a continued middle-aged person. See what I mean? See, that's the rite of passage that's missing. Agedness should formally execute for all time middle-agedness. Failure to do so confuses everyone in that part of the slipstream. When are you, and you know what they say now, age is a matter of how you feel about yourself. What? If you feel young, what does feeling young mean? Could we be frank? You haven't felt young in 42 years. Ask young people if they feel young, you idiot. I promise you're going to say, nope, working on that, trying not to feel young. All right, so the second half of your life, what's it for, mister? Maybe it's this. You know that reason you're born? Yeah. Well, now you have to find those people with whom to live out those reasons. And this is not a recipe for a romantic success. This is a recipe for serving the world via community work, is what I would say. So it's the final divorce you from yourself and its many teeth-gnashing, gnawing claims it makes upon you. So far from being an exercise in self-expression, agedness is the annihilation of self and expression. Let me elaborate what I mean, because I know that's fairly aggressive language. So you could say this. How does a generation become a generation? Is it because somebody anoints them as the 60s or the 80s? Fortunately, no. No, I think a generation becomes a generation by virtue of the times it was born to. In other words, you could say that you become a generation by virtue of your willingness to be understood as a child of those particular circumstances, many of which are not terribly complementary. That's a really important detail. In our times, especially. So you become fundamentally a child of your time, not a child of the universe, of your times. And you could say now that young people aren't even afforded the opportunity to occupy a generational identity because things are happening too fast. Okay? So nobody's got time for a generation's worth of labor. So you know what they have instead? Decade. A decade. That's their identity slot now. And what does it sound like? Well, if you actually do the math on a decade, you're talking about 5 years on either side of you at any given time. And if you think that's overstated, I cannot tell you how many times young people have come up to me at the end of stuff that I've done and say, I had no idea until you started speaking about it. I do not know one person older than me that's outside my family. And now that I think about it, I'm not sure I know anybody younger than me either. Now, the amazing thing about a generational identity is there's a time span within the generation. I mean, we arbitrarily have to just choose a few numbers to say it, but you could say it's easily in the neighborhood of between 20 and 30 years. And there's a tremendous range of life experience inside that. But if you inhabit the Anthropocene era, as all of you do, and myself included, then you know that there's no patience for engagement with people 15 to 20 years on either side of you. It's too confusing. Shit's happening too fast. You can't talk music. You can't talk anything. Okay, but 5 years on either side, you have a shared memory, if you want to call that shit a memory. It's mostly free association with the stuff that has stuck for the time being.